What's the worst thing you can think of? This guy's probably done it and then said he didn't. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are the top 10 chilling things John Wayne Gacy has said. Make sure you subscribe and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, let's get the clown makeup. Also, side note, I appreciate all of our subscribers. Thank you very much.
Everybody from the neighborhood knew John Gacy.
I was clowning and appearing in at least 10, 15 parades.
Number 10, when he said that some of the identifications of his victims were wrong. I'm not interested in what the public thinks. My fight is in the courts. And while I have been fighting with the appeal, it has been an uphill battle because I am an unpopular cause. Too much public pressure, too much politics. To give me a hearing so that I can prove that the state withheld evidence favorable to me, that the identifications of some of the victims was wrong, and that my attorney was more concerned about book rights and how sensationally more the case could get, the higher the value of the book. Gacy alleges that his attorney only took his defense because he wanted the information about Gacy so that he could put it in a book. He is asking here for another hearing for his case, perhaps to reduce his sentence to something lighter. Gacy's sentence ended up in execution, as he was sentenced to capital punishment for his crimes. Gacy became a Democratic precinct captain in the Chicago suburbs in the 1970s, and in this capacity he met the wife of Jimmy Carter, Rosalind. There's a famous photo of Gacy with Carter, which she signed to John Gacy, best wishes, Rosalind Carter, Chicago, Vronsky. Someone said that this was a big part of the Democratic Party machine at the time, and Gacy was heavily involved, even acting as a marshal in a Polish parade. Number 9, when he said Jeffrey Dahmer was more insane than him. If Jeffrey Dahmer doesn't meet the legal test for insanity, God help the one that does meet it. It has to really be something. If Jeffrey Dahmer doesn't meet it, then nobody does. And for me, it's a psychological ploy to use. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't end up being legally insane. The reason why Jeffrey Dahmer's insanity defense was rejected is because the jury did not see clear and convincing evidence of how Jeffrey Dahmer's mental condition caused him to commit the crimes without understanding the wrongness of his actions. If you are wondering if Gacy himself met the legal test for insanity, here's a quote directly from an official law review from West Virginia University in 1984. Given the psychiatric evaluation of Gacy, neither a criminal sentence nor a program of treatment for a mentally disordered offender may be adequate or appropriate. The case suggests the need to consider the possibility of permanent isolation and incapacitation of dangerous persons who are not treatable nor rehabilitatable, nor properly subject to execution. In addition to becoming one of Netflix's most popular shows of the year with 500 million hours watched already, Dahmer is actually so popular that it's making an entirely separate serial executioner rise up Netflix's top 10 list. That would be the true crime docuseries Conversations with a Terminator, the John Wayne Gacy tapes, which is a 3-episode, 3-hour documentary that features details of Gacy's slaughters and interviews with the man himself. Number 8, when he was trying to convince the court that he was truly insane or had no knowledge of the crimes committed. No, I don't think that's possible. After 14 years under truth serum, had I committed the crime, I would have known it. There's got to be something that would click in my mind. I've had photos of 21 of the victims, and I've looked at them all over the years here, and I've never recognized any one of them.
The thing of it is, we took it a step further. We went into their backgrounds. I wanted to know where they were at, what schools they attended, who they hung out with, and what kind of activities they were into. And that's what we dug up on each one of the victims. But still, there is no association. None of them never worked for me. None of them, they never went to any places that I ever hung around, because I didn't hang around that many places unless you were involved in politics.
He's lying through his teeth right here. He wants the court to believe that he didn't recognize the victims at all, and thus he couldn't have committed the crimes, or that he was insane for not being able to remember that he committed the slaughters. Whatever he tried here, it failed for him, as we all know. John Wayne Gacy is obsessively fond of defending his innocence, which is imaginary. On March 12, 1980, he was convicted in Chicago of ending the lives of 33 guys. The removals took place between 1972 and 1978, when he was caught and arrested. No one else in America has ever been convicted of ending so many people. 27 of the bodies were buried in a crawl space beneath the house where Gacy lived, in a neighborhood out by O'Hare Airport. Number 7, when he created a conspiracy against the state of Illinois. If you're talking about the Summerdale house and the bodies found there, we feel that some of them passed of substance overdose, then were buried alive. Trouble is, the state never did toxicology on the victims, as they wouldn't fit their theory that they were all strangled. Even Dr. Stein says that the 13 passed of suffocation and 10 were left undetermined, which leads me to believe that they were not terminated the way the state wants you to believe. The state of Illinois had a running theory that Gacy strangled all of his victims, which Gacy denied vehemently. I'm not sure if he's denying the cause of execution for the 10 other victims to reduce his sentence or to say he's innocent. If you know, then let us know in the comments below. The case of John Wayne Gacy is particularly valuable in that it presents an opportunity to examine the functioning of the insanity defense in a trial where no other legal issues were before the jury. The defendant's confessions to police and their admission at trial, along with the location of the remains of victims, some located with the assistance of the defendant, effectively eliminated the alternative plea of not guilty. Number 6, when he said the public was brainwashed. Keep in mind, the public has been brainwashed, and nearly 80% of what is known about me is fantasy and self-serving theories of the state. But overall, I am an embarrassment of the justice system, because if I am right, then they are wrong, and the butchers are still out there. For political reasons, it would be better that I drop out of life. Then they could all say what a great job they've done, and nobody else would be pushing for the truth to come out.
People don't want to know the truth and the honesty of it. If they want to be convinced or brainwashed into what they believe, then fine, then go ahead and kill me. But vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, because you will have executed somebody that didn't commit the crime.
Another conspiracy from Mr. Gacy. At this point, he might really be insane, but it's better that he wasn't sentenced for insanity because this guy really did some awful things. When asked about his trial during an interview later, he dived deeper into the conspiracy. Okay, you sold a car to your employee Michael Rossi that belonged to one of the victims, John Syke. Yet you deny this, said the interviewer. Gacy replied, "That's true. This came out at trial too. Yet it's not true, and even the state knew this and covered it up." The Bureau of Scientific Services in Maywood, Illinois on March 27, 1979, a year before the trial. This report showed that the handwriting samples were taken from me, from John Syke, the victim, and from Michael Rossi, and they were compared to the motor vehicle title R1209194 and the other questionable vehicle transfer papers. The result of the findings was that all the names were forged by Michael Rossi, as it was all done in his handwriting. Yet at trial, even knowing this, the state told the jury that John Wayne Gacy did this. My defense attorney never objected to it because they thought it didn't harm my case. Number 5, when he explained why he marked the spot in the garage where some of the bodies were hidden. Yes, I marked the spot in the garage. When I was back at the house on December 22nd, they had asked me to. With all the rebuilding of the garage, which was the last area of concrete, in the last area where the concrete was poured, and they handed me an orange spray can and I put an X. That's it. An X over the spot in the corner of the garage where I thought the last area was poured. Now all of a sudden, Kunkel claims that I not only drew an X, but I put an O on top of it, where the head was, and made that X look like it was a stick figure, and that's not true. Gacy buried Butkovich's body under his garage. He then took the teen's car and left it in a parking lot with Butkovich's keys and wallet sitting out in the front seat. Butkovich's parents were convinced that Gacy was involved in the boy's disappearance and called police at least once a week for nearly 2 years, urging them to investigate Gacy. Had the police followed the Butkovich's instructions, the lives of at least 30 other young men and teenage boys could have been spared. Unfortunately for the victims, the cops hadn't put in any effort in finding the bodies. Number 4, when he talked about whether or not there was an odor in the Somerville house. This one's kinda gross. There was no smell. Over the years, other than when it rained, the musty odor was present. People were in and out of that house daily for years, and other than when it rained, there was no odor, and certainly not like what some of the books said. That's all fantasy. If that odor was there, somebody would have noticed it sooner.
29 bodies buried in that house of his on Summerdale, a crime of horrendous proportions. In the crawl space underneath, bodies covered with lime and encased in plastic, dug up a few days before Christmas and carried into the December cold, one after another after another.
When his second wife, Carol, whom he divorced in 1975, would complain about the smell emanating from beneath their home, he would chalk it up to some sewage issue, enlisting workers at his contracting company to spread hundreds of pounds of lime in the crawl space in an effort to conceal the stench. The stench was actually one of the main reasons he was caught, because his neighbors kept complaining about it. Number 3, when he explained that other people had keys to his rental house. Yes, that's true, but the house wasn't a home. Like what you go to a home to every night. The Summerdale house is rented to PDM contractors. There was 12 keys out to it, but that was never allowed to come out at the trial, as it would put doubt in the state's theory. They didn't want anybody to know that people had keys to the house. Plus the fact that I wasn't always at the house, so others used it just as much. And again, that wasn't brought out at the trial as it didn't fit the state's theory of the case that I committed all the crimes. If 11 people had access to the home, how come no one else complained about the smell? It's actually very strange in my opinion. Number 2, when he denied he ever confessed. That is what has been said in the media and at the trial. To this day, nobody has produced one. There is no written confession. There is no tape recorded confession. There is no police stenographer typed confession. It was in my appeal and the court refused to look at it and the state refused to answer it. If they had nothing to hide, I can't understand why they can't produce one. It's interesting that he says he never confessed when on December 22nd, 1978, John Wayne Gacy confessed to police to ending over 24 young men and burying their bodies under his suburban Chicago home. Maybe he was just joking when he confessed. Number 1, when he implied that he didn't work alone. It wasn't in the state's best interest to let the jury know. They said it would raise doubt that John Gacy acted alone. The defense attorneys didn't bring it out because it didn't go along with their insanity defense, showing others were involved. A lot came to light in John Wayne Gacy's trial. The garage where he kept the bodies of the victims, the implication of another person being involved, so much to follow and keep track of that it kind of gets convoluted. Well, at least we know that justice was indeed served. Thanks for watching. If you're gonna be single for Christmas, then you're not alone. Sit back and enjoy these criminals instead. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are the top 10 evil couples in history you never want to meet. Make sure you subscribe and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, let's pair up. Number 10, Carla Homolka and Paul Bernardo. The pair of criminals first met in 1987, where the veterinary technician Carla Homolka was introduced to the cigarette smuggler Paul Bernardo. Before the pair met up, Paul had violated more than 10 people. Between the years 1990 and 1992, Homolka and Bernardo ended the lives of and violated 3 women, including Homolka's sister. Paul Bernardo is currently serving life in prison for the crimes, but Carla Homolka got an amazing deal from the courts and only served 12 years for her involvement in the crimes. Homolka is now free, married, and has 3 children. The pair were known as the Ken and Barbie Butchers while they were active, and I'm not totally sure why, because the two were kind of butters in my opinion. Number 9, Christine Paulila and Chris Snyder. In 2003, 17-year-old Christine Paulila met 21-year-old Christopher Lee Snyder the same year that Paulila was voted Miss Irresistible by her classmates. The two began dating and fell into a life of substance abuse. On July 18th of that year, Paulila and Snyder went to Paulila's friend's house in order to steal substances, but after an argument ensued, the couple shot and ended the lives of the 4 people in the house, 2 of Paulila's best friends and their boyfriends, and went on the run. It would be almost 3 years until police apprehended Paulila for the crime. Paulila was sentenced to life in prison with the chance of parole in 2046, and Snyder overdosed on a needle substance before he was able to be charged. Taking the easy way out, huh? Number 8, Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Stank. In 2006, Jasmine Richardson met Jeremy Stank, a self-proclaimed 300-year-old vampire, at a punk rock concert. The two began dating, much to the outrage and chagrin of Richardson's parents. The two grounded her and forbade her from seeing Stank ever again. So, in retaliation, on the night of April 22nd, 2006, Richardson and Stank ended the lives of Richardson's parents and her brother. While Stank was sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences for 3 counts of first-degree butchery, since Richardson was a minor, her maximum sentence was only 10 years, including time served. She was released in 2016. That's an extreme reaction to being grounded. Your parents took the time to raise you and that's what you do? Everyone watching this video, make sure to tell your parents you love them today. Show them you care. Number 7, Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail. In 2017, 23-year-old Bailey Boswell and 50-year-old Aubrey Trail lured Sydney Loof to her passing. Initially, Loof thought she was going on a date with Boswell, whom she met on Tinder, but in actuality, she was a targeted victim of this couple. Loof's remains were found throughout 16 garbage bags, and not long after, Boswell and Trail were arrested. Trail was found guilty of first-degree slaughter, conspiracy to commit slaughter, and improper disposal of human remains, and was sentenced to execution. Bailey, who was also found guilty, is currently waiting to hear if she will be sentenced to life in prison or to execution. Stay safe on those dating apps, fellas. I personally don't have to worry because I get no matches anyways. Number 6, Martha Beck and Raymond Fernandez. In 1947, conman Raymond Fernandez responded to Martha Beck's Lonely Hearts ad in the paper. After realizing she wasn't as rich as he surmised, he's a gold digger, he left her. However, Beck still pursued Fernandez into 1948. He finally told her that he was a con man and swindled women out of their money. But instead of running away, Beck asked to become his accomplice. The two went on to swindle and remove between 3 to 17 women over the next year, under the guise of being brother and sister. Beck and Fernandez were found guilty of first-degree slaughter and sentenced to execution via electric chair. They both passed away in 1951. The two were known as the Lonely Hearts Butchers. Now that's what I call wholesome. Just two folks who don't really romantically like each other getting together for some extracurricular activities. Number 5, Sarah Jane and John Mackin. In 1871, Sarah Jane and John Mackin married and went on to have 10 children together. Sometime in the late 1880s, John lost his job, so he and Sarah became baby farmers, caring for illegitimate children in exchange for money, a precursor to foster care, if you will, to a number of infants. In 1893, the Mackins were found guilty of slaughtering Horace Murray, but after further investigation, police discovered the corpses of at least 12 bodies on their property, who the police believe the Mackins received payment for after their passings. John Mackin was sentenced to execution, and Sarah Mackin was sentenced to life in prison but was paroled in 1911. These people were absolutely deranged. Then again, anyone who calls themselves a baby farmer should definitely be ashamed of themselves at the very least. At least a little teased, you know? Why make it so weird? At number 4, Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole. In 1976, Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole, two men who were abused by their mothers and forced to dress up as little girls, started a relationship after bonding over their childhood abuse. Soon after, they discovered their taste for blood and began torturing and executing innocent victims together. The two later separated and were apprehended separately for other crimes. Both Lucas and Toole confessed to hundreds of executions, but only 3 and 6 victims were confirmed respectively. Lucas and Toole were both sentenced to life in prison and passed in prison in 2001 and 1996 respectively. I almost felt bad for these guys because of their childhood, but it's actually proven that childhood trauma is super common in serial executioners. I feel like it's just so normal for the criminals to have family problems that it's beyond sympathy. What do you guys think? At number 3, Inessa Tarverdieva and Roman Podkapayev. This one is absolutely wild. Inessa Tarverdieva, her second husband Roman Podkapayev, and her daughters, Victoria and Anastasia, are a family of serial butchers. In 2013, the family was apprehended, and it was discovered that they ended the lives of at least 30 people and stole thousands of dollars. Upon searching their home, police found over 20 firearms inside. Podkapayev was ended in a police shootout, but Inessa, Victoria, and Anastasia were sentenced to 16 to 21 years in prison for their crimes. I told you it was crazy. Even if you're running a family-run business of chopping up people like cilantro and stealing their Parmesan, why would you ever need 20 firearms? Does each family member have 5 favorites or something? Is it like a tasting menu for torture? Who knows? Number 2, Gwendolyn Graham and Kathy Wood. In 1987, Gwendolyn Graham and Kathy Wood, who was married to a man at the time, were nurses' aides in Michigan who ended the lives of 5 of their elderly patients from their nursing home. According to Wood, Graham would execute the patients and then have intimate relations with her as a way to relieve tension. In an exchange for a lesser sentence, Wood testified against Graham, who was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Wood received a sentence of 20 to 40 years and was released in 2020. This might be controversial, but I'm just saying, executing the elderly is being a serial butcher on easy mode. There's no thrill in the chase or anything. Maybe I've been working on this channel for too long. At number 1, what list would be incomplete without Bonnie and Clyde? In 1930, 19-year-old Bonnie Parker met 21-year-old Clyde Barrow. The next couple of years, Barrow spent in and out of prison, but once he was released in 1932, their crime spree began. Even though they're most known for their numerous robberies of banks and small stores, they also put up to 9 cops and 4 civilians in the dirt. On May 13th, 1934, police officers and Texas Rangers opened fire on Parker and Barrow as they were leaving their hideout. They were shot and executed instantly. These two have been the inspiration for so many copycats that it's hard to believe they passed in such a mundane way. Sure, it's kind of crazy to be instantly eliminated as soon as you walk outside, but they didn't fight back or anything. Thanks for watching. Italian mobsters, bank robbers, robbers, and criminals. This isn't a video you want to miss. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are the top 10 famous Alcatraz inmates they hid from you. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, welcome to Alcatraz. Number 10, John and Clarence Anglin. These two convicts are brothers, so I put them both in the same spot. The two were born into a family of 13 kids, but were inseparable together. The brothers began robbing banks and other establishments as a team in the early 1950s, usually targeting businesses that were closed to ensure that no one got injured. They claimed that they used a weapon only once during a bank heist, a toy gun. In 1958, John, Clarence, and Alfred Anglin robbed the Columbia Savings Bank building in Columbia, Alabama. All received 35-year sentences, which they served at Florida State Prison, Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, and then Atlanta Penitentiary. After repeated attempts to escape from the Atlanta facility, John and Clarence were transferred to Alcatraz. The brothers were also a part of the world-famous escape from Alcatraz, though no one knows if it was successful or not. Number 9, Herbert Allen Farmer. Herbert, along with his wife, provided a safe house for underworld fugitives from the mid-1920s to 1933. In the 1920s, his farm in southwest Missouri was a safe harbor for bank robbers and other criminals of the Cookson Hills region, such as Harvey Bailey, Frank Nash, Wilbur Underhill, Big Bob Brady, and the Holden Keating Gang. In the public enemy era, as organized crime strengthened and expanded in the United States, the farm became part of a network of safe houses for gangsters along the Midwest crime corridor. On the 16th of 1933, Herbert and Esther Farmer were involved in the plan which set into motion the Kansas City Massacre, a pivotal event in Depression-era crime. With 5 others, they were convicted of conspiracy to free a federal prisoner, Frank Nash, in January 1935. He received the maximum fine for his actions and was sent to Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, later being transferred to Alcatraz. Number 8, Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, also known as Bumpy. Johnson was an associate of Madame Stephanie St. Clair, a queen at a certain game called Numbers, which is really just an illegal lottery. He became her principal lieutenant in the 1930s before they both started a fight with the New York mob boss Dutch Schultz. The fight resulted in 40 people executed and several kidnapped. Eventually, the fight was over and Johnson's side lost. In 1952, Johnson's activities were reported in the Celebrity People section of Jet magazine. That same year, Johnson was sentenced to 15 years in prison for a substance conspiracy conviction. 2 years later, Jet magazine reported in its crime section that Johnson began his sentence after losing an appeal. He served the majority of that sentence at Alcatraz Prison in San Francisco Bay, California, as inmate number 1117. Number 7, Alvin Creepy Karpis. Karpis was born in Montreal, Quebec, but raised in Kansas. He began his life of crime at the age of only 10 years old. At that age, he ran around with gamblers and bootleggers. After moving to Kansas City, Missouri, he was caught stealing a car and sent back to the reformatory. Transferred to the Kansas State Penitentiary in Lansing, he met Fred Barker, who was in prison for bank burglary. Barker was one of the notorious members of the Bloody Barkers, as the newspapers of the time called them. The Barker-Karpis gang became one of the most formidable criminal gangs of the 1930s. They did not hesitate to execute anyone who got in their way, even innocent bystanders. On December 19, 1931, Karpis and Fred Barker executed Sheriff C. Roy Kelly, who was investigating the robbery of a store in West Plains, Missouri. The gang, including Ma Barker and her paramour, Arthur Dunlop, fled to St. Paul, Minnesota. Karpis has been described as the leader or brains of the gang. Gang members Fred Hunter said Karpis was super smart and he was reported to have a photographic memory. The capture of Karpis essentially ended the age of big-name Depression-era criminals. Karpis was incarcerated at the then recently constructed Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary from August 1936 to April 1962. He served the longest sentence ever at Alcatraz, 26 years. Number 6, Morton Sobel. Morton Sobel was an American engineer and Soviet spy during and after WW2. He was charged as part of a conspiracy which included Julius Rosenberg and his wife. Sobel worked on military and government contracts with General Electric and Reeves Instrument Corporation in the 1940s, including during WW2. Sobel was tried and convicted of espionage in 1951 and sentenced to 30 years in prison. According to NKGB agent Alexander Feklisov, Sobel was recruited as a spy in the summer of 1944 during WW2 when the Soviet Union had become an ally of the United States. Sobel was deferred from active military service because he was a top specialist in his field. When I asked him if he could microfilm his own documents, he replied it was not a problem since he knew photography quite well. At our next meeting, I brought him a camera with the necessary accessories and a small stock of film. Sobel was initially sent to Alcatraz, but was transferred to Lewisburg Penitentiary when that prison closed in 1963. Number 5, Al Scarface Al Capone. Alphonse Gabriel Capone, sometimes known by the nickname Scarface, was an American gangster and businessman who attained notoriety during the Prohibition era as the co-founder and boss of the Chicago Outfit. The Chicago Outfit was an Italian-American organized crime syndicate based in Chicago, Illinois. Capone was widely assumed to have been responsible for ordering the 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre, despite being at his Florida home at the time of the massacre. The massacre was an attempt to eliminate Bugs Moran. Number 4, Robert Stroud. Robert Franklin Stroud, known as the Birdman of Alcatraz, was a convicted executioner, American federal prisoner, and author who has been cited as one of the most notorious criminals in the United States. During his time at Leavenworth Penitentiary, he reared and sold birds and became a respected ornithologist. From 1942 to 1959, he was incarcerated at Alcatraz, where regulations did not allow him to keep birds. Stroud was never released from the federal prison system. He was imprisoned from 1909 to his passing in 1963. Stroud gained a reputation for being a dangerous inmate. He often started fights with fellow inmates and prison staff. This escalated in 1916, where he stabbed a prison guard until his demise. Number 3, Sam Shockley. Shockley presented an IQ of just 68, giving him a mental age of 10 years and 10 months. After robbing a man for his car, robbing a bank, and kidnapping 2 employees, he was sent to Leavenworth. He suffered episodes of hallucinations and demonstrated serious emotional instability and was incapable of coping with the normal prison environment, presenting a risk to himself and others. Rather than transferring him to the medical center for federal prisoners at Springfield, Missouri, officials at Leavenworth sent him to Alcatraz on September 23, 1938, where it was believed the strict routine would better manage him. Shockley was placed for 3 years in the D-block isolation section, for most of the time in the hole or dungeon, the darkened, stripping cells on the ground level where he spent most of his time in darkness. At night, he was allowed a blanket and a mattress. During the day, he was sitting and lying on the cold concrete. His condition deteriorated. He displayed classic schizophrenic symptoms, delusions, auditory hallucinations, and disorientation. His IQ dropped to 54, indicating a mental age of 8. Number 2, George Kelly Barnes, aka Machine Gun Kelly. Barnes, better known as his pseudonym Machine Gun Kelly, was an American gangster from Memphis, Tennessee, active during the Prohibition era. His nickname came from his very favorite weapon, a Thompson submachine gun. He is best known for the kidnapping of oil tycoon and businessman Charles F. Urschel in July 1933, from which he and his gang collected a $200,000 ransom. Urschel had collected and left considerable evidence that assisted the subsequent FBI investigation, which eventually led to Kelly's arrest in Memphis, Tennessee on September 26, 1933. His crimes also included bootlegging and armed robbery. Machine Gun Kelly spent his remaining 21 years in prison. During his time at Alcatraz, he got the nickname Pop Gun Kelly. According to fellow inmate Dale Stamphill, the nickname originated because he told big fish stories. The cons called him Pop Gun Kelly, after cork guns that were popular with kids. The guys didn't take him seriously. This may have stemmed from the fact that, in addition to his exaggerated tall tales, Kelly was a model prisoner and did not act like the brutal gangster his wife, the media, and FBI made him out to be. Number 1, Frank Morris. Frank Morris was born in Washington, D.C. His parents abandoned him when he was 11, so he spent the rest of his childhood in foster homes, an orphan. He was convicted of his first criminal offense at 13, and by his late teens had been arrested for crimes ranging from substance possession to armed robbery. He spent most of his early years in jail serving lunch to prisoners. Later, he was arrested for grand larceny in Miami Beach, car theft, and armed robbery. Morris reportedly ranked in the top 2% of the general population in intelligence, as measured by his IQ testing 133. He served time in Florida and Georgia, then escaped from the Louisiana State Penitentiary while serving 10 years for bank robbery. He was recaptured a year later while committing a burglary and sent to Alcatraz on January 10, 1960, as inmate number AZ1441. The crew used a raft made of raincoats and fake heads they'd sculpted during their time there to trick the guards. If the CIA are afraid of these people, you probably should be too. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are the top 10 scary people the CIA feared the most. Make sure you're subscribed and ring that bell so you get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, let's get scared. At number 10, Oleksandr Vitalyevich Yaremenko. The man, also known as ZL0M and Lamarez, is responsible for 3 main things according to the Secret Service. A. He hacked into the computer networks of MarketWired, PR Newswire, and Business Wire. B. He stole confidential press releases containing material non-public information from the victim company's internal computer networks prior to their public release. And C, he traded ahead of the material non-public information contained in the stolen releases before its distribution. The current reward on the man's head is $1 million for information leading to the arrest and or conviction of Radchenko and Yaremenko for participating in transnational organized crime. At number 9, Daniil Petekin. Daniil Petekin and Dmitry Vadimovich Karasavidi launched a sophisticated phishing campaign targeting users of multiple digital currency exchanges. Petekin and Karasavidi purchased and deployed multiple web domains that appeared to be websites belonging to legitimate digital currency exchanges. However, when users logged into these fraudulent websites, Petekin and Karasavidi were able to steal the user's credentials, enabling the defendants to control the actual digital currency exchange accounts, withdraw some or all of the victim's digital currency, and manipulate the market for digital currency. At number 8, another hacker, Roman Sergeyevich Kotov. Roman Kotov and other co-conspirators operated a prolific hacking organization that was responsible for several of the largest known data breaches. Among other exploits during that period, the defendants and their co-conspirators penetrated the secure computer network of several of the largest payment processing companies, retailers, and financial institutions in the world, and stole the personal identifying information of others. At number 7, Rashad Lamar Tulloch. On July 5th, 2018, a federal grand jury in Lexington, Kentucky returned a 24-count indictment charging 15 foreign nationals with Racketeering Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act (RICO) conspiracy, wire fraud conspiracy, money laundering conspiracy, and aggravated identity theft. The charges stemmed from the defendants' alleged roles in an international organized crime group based primarily in Alexandria, Romania, that defrauded American victims through online auction fraud, causing millions of dollars in losses. At number 6, Fyodor Rofovich Manikin. Manikin recruited and maintained a network of money mules, often visiting foreign students who opened bank accounts in their own names in the United States for the purpose of receiving laundered money and sending it to Russia. Manikin used his network of mule accounts to offer cash-out services for illicitly obtained funds from bank account takeovers, enabling the perpetrators to wire the illicit funds into the mule accounts. Manikin notified the mules and their handlers of the timing and amounts of wire transfers of money from victim bank accounts into the mule bank accounts, directed them to make cash withdrawals from the mule bank accounts, and provided the dollar amounts, names, and locations of persons to whom the illicit funds should be sent. At number 5, Ahmed Yassin Abdelghani. Ahmed Yassin Abdelghani managed the daily operations of Liberty Reserve between approximately 2006 and 2009. Liberty Reserve operated as a criminal bank payment processor designed to help users conduct illegal transactions anonymously and launder the proceeds of their crimes. It emerged as one of the principal money transfer agents used by cyber criminals and the world to distribute, store, and launder illicit proceeds. At number 4, Mikhailo Sergeyevich Rydikov. Rydikov offered bulletproof hosting services, which is leasing servers from which law enforcement supposedly could not gain access or obtain information, to his co-conspirators. Rydikov's bulletproof hosting services included frequently changing the locations of hacking platforms, erasing the contents of hacking platforms on short notice, accepting false credentials to register and lease hacking platforms, and discouraging internet service providers, ISPs, from deactivating hacking platforms suspected of illegal activity. As a result of this conduct, financial institutions, credit card companies, and consumers suffered hundreds of millions of US dollars in losses. At number 3, Alexei Volodymyrovich Bystrov. Alexei Volodymyrovich Bystrov and his co-conspirators fraudulently obtained the online banking login credentials belonging to numerous customers of a US financial institution. Using those credentials without the knowledge or authorization of the rightful account holders, Bystrov and his associates set up ACH, automated clearing house links, between those victim accounts and destination accounts controlled by Bystrov and his associates. In doing so, Bystrov and his co-conspirators falsely represented themselves as the legitimate customers of the US financial institution, subsequently caused and attempted to cause said US financial institution to execute wire transfers into bank accounts controlled by Bystrov and his associates. Furthermore, Bystrov and his co-conspirators changed the verification phone numbers and verification email addresses on the victim accounts to phone numbers and email accounts under the control of the fraudsters. At number 2, Egbe Tony Iyamu. Egbe Tony Iyamu is a member of the Cape Town, South Africa-based chapter of the Neo-Black Movement of Africa criminal organization, also known as Black Axe. From at least 2011 until 2021, Iyamu and other members of Black Axe worked together to engage in widespread internet fraud involving romance scams and advanced fee scams. The conspirators used social media websites, online dating websites, and voice-over internet protocol phone numbers to find and talk with victims in the United States while using a number of aliases. At number 1, the co-conspirator of her number 10 spot. Radchenko and Yaremenko's scheme focused on stealing annual, quarterly, and current reports of publicly traded companies before the reports were disseminated. Many of the stolen reports contained material non-public information concerning, among other things, the earnings of the companies. Radchenko and Yaremenko sought to profit illegally from the scheme by selling access to the non-public information contained in these yet-to-be disclosed reports, and by trading the securities of the company before the investing public learned the same information. There's nothing better than freedom, wouldn't you say? Well, freedom and food are pretty closely tied with each other, but anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are 10 scary prison escapes the FBI can't figure out. If you want to keep up to date with the latest videos on this channel, make sure to press subscribe and ring that bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, let's get started. Number 10. The outlandish escape from a Mexican prison. Joel David Kaplan was a New York businessman who had been arrested for execution in 1962 in Mexico City and was incarcerated at the Santa Martha Acatitla prison in the Iztapalapa borough of Mexico City. Joel's sister, Judy Kaplan, arranged the means to help Kaplan escape, and on August 19, 1971, a helicopter landed in the prison yard. The guards mistakenly thought this was an official visit. In 2 minutes, Kaplan and his cellmate, Carlos Antonio Contreras, a Venezuelan counterfeiter, were able to board the craft and were piloted away before any shots were fired. Both men were flown to Texas, and then different planes flew Kaplan to California and Castro to Guatemala. The Mexican government never initiated extradition proceedings against Kaplan. The escape is told in a book, The 10-Second Jailbreak, The Helicopter Escape of Joel David Kaplan. It also inspired the 1975 action movie Breakout. At number 9, the escape of 3 Irish Republican Army members. On October 31st, 1973, an IRA member hijacked a helicopter and forced the pilot to land in the exercise yard of Dublin's Mountjoy Jail's D Wing at 3:40 p.m. 3 members of the IRA were able to escape: J.B. O'Hagan, Seamus Toomey, and Kevin Mallon. Another prisoner who also was in the prison was quoted as saying, "One shamefaced screw apologized to the governor and said he thought it was the new Minister for Defense. I told him it was our Minister of Defense leaving." The Mountjoy helicopter escape became Republican lore and was immortalized by the helicopter song, which contains the lines, "It's up like a bird and over the city. There's 3 men missing, I heard the warder say." Number 8. On November 3rd, 2019, Samuel Fonseca, 21, and Jonathan Salazar, 20, both convicted executioners, escaped from Monterey County Jail, located in Salinas, California. The 2 men escaped after using a hard plastic cleaning brush to knock a hole in the restroom sheetrock ceiling. The hole was in a blind spot in the communal bathroom that could only be seen by someone inside the restroom. They then escaped by going through the 11-inch wide hole, then through a maintenance gap between walls, and finally out a hatch that was kicked open, with the cameras nearby blocked by recent construction. After they escaped, they took off their jail suit. They were wearing street clothes underneath that allowed them to blend in as they headed to Tijuana, Mexico. Fonseca and Salazar had been in rival gangs and were not known to associate with each other before being housed in the same unit of the jail. Similarly, it is unknown why the 2 headed for Tijuana, how they made the 7-hour trip, and why they tried to re-enter the United States from Mexico around midnight 3 days after their escape, only to be arrested by the US Marshals on the border. Fonseca was accused of executing 2 men over 3 days in Salinas in June 2018. Salazar was arrested in the October 2017 shooting and passing of a Salinas man and the wounding of the man's wife while the couple drove in a Salinas neighborhood. Number 7. The escape involving what guards thought was an impossible stunt. In 1921, at age 22, Victor Folk Nelson made a sensational and highly publicized run and escape from a line of 13 prisoners after attending chapel at the Charleston State Prison. Despite an attempted intervening tackle from a prisoner trustee and bullets from a guard's gun, Nelson ran some distance, leapt, caught the lower end of the window bars, and scaled the 40-foot high wall of the prison's Cherry Hill section. At the top of the wall, he performed what was always believed an impossible stunt, throwing his body across a 10-foot space to the wall, where he managed to catch hold of the coping of a nearby structure and then to drop 30 feet down to the Boston and Maine railroad tracks. He was convinced to volitionally return to prison by his respected mentor and progressive penologist. His mentor was the only one to know of his whereabouts, meaning no one but Osborne found him until he turned himself in. Number 6. The infamous escape from Alcatraz. On June 11th, 1962, Frank Morris and the brothers John and Clarence Anglin, 3 inmates of the Alcatraz maximum security federal prison located on an island in San Francisco Bay, pulled off one of the greatest prison escapes in American history. After months of planning, they squeezed through air vents and made their way into the Pacific Ocean, where they boarded a raft they'd made out of stolen raincoats. They were never seen again. but their raft and paddles washed up ashore. Many believe the men drowned in the icy waters. The Anglin family insists the brothers survived and have presented evidence to prove it. The FBI can't quite figure out what to believe. Number 5. The only person to ever successfully escape and remain hidden from New York State Prison. On February 6, 1997, Victor Figueroa, a convict serving 1 to 4 years for substance possession, was supposed to be on the way to the mess hall when he wandered off from the Maria Shock incarceration facility. As soon as his absence was noticed, authorities secured the area, but the trail went cold. Authorities believed Figueroa passed away during the escape, most likely in a fall through a mine shaft near the facility. All anyone knows for sure is Figueroa was never seen or heard from again, and he's the only New York State Prison inmate to escape and never be found. Number 4. In 1987, Glenn Stewart Godwin escaped from Folsom State Prison in California. He was serving a lengthy sentence for execution. According to the FBI, the agency still has him on its most wanted list. Later that year, he was arrested for substance trafficking in Mexico and sent to prison in Guadalajara. In 1991, he allegedly executed a fellow inmate and escaped yet again. He goes by a number of aliases, including Michael Carrera, Nigel Lopez, and Dennis Harold McWilliams, and is believed to be somewhere in Central or South America. The FBI is offering a $20,000 reward for information leading to his arrest. He has never been found and could still be out there right now. Number 3. On June 1st, 1971, Leonard Rain Moses escaped after being granted a furlough from prison to attend his grandmother's funeral in the Homewood section of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. At the time, he was serving a life sentence for execution in connection with the Pittsburgh riots of 1968 that followed the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Moses remains at large and is still considered armed and dangerous. The FBI is offering a reward up to $10,000 for information leading directly to the arrest of Moses. This one is crazy. Imagine using your grandmother's funeral to escape from prison. I'm not sure if that's crazy or kinda smart. Number 2. The escape of a crime ring king. Omid Nino Tavili was the head of a Persian organized crime network in Canada. In 2007, while in custody, Tavili walked out of a maximum security prison in Canada's British Columbia wearing a janitor's uniform. He had the assistance of a guard whom he'd bribed to look the other way. The guard, whom Tavili never paid, was prosecuted, but Tavili remains an international fugitive. Tavili is also wanted in the United States in connection with a fraudulent telemarketing business that targeted the elderly. In 2017, Tavili, who is now almost 40, may have called the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to negotiate his return to custody in exchange for a promise not to extradite him to the United States. And at number 1, a man with a plan. On August 22nd, 1970, George Edward Wright first escaped from a New Jersey prison. He was caught and put back in prison, only to escape again in 1972, and then he came up with a plan to avoid being re-imprisoned. On July 31st, 1972, Wright and accomplices hijacked a Delta airplane. After collecting ransom and releasing the passengers, Wright and his crew flew the plane to Algiers. In 2011, the police caught up with him in Portugal. Since Portugal has no extradition treaty with the United States, Wright was released and remains at large. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Like the video if you liked the video, and we'll see you next time.